Welcome, everybody. I'll be sharing my screen so we can all see this beautiful presentation I put together for our Pesach learning for this year. And my goal for tonight is to give you some ideas, maybe things you have seen before, maybe things that are new to you, to make your Seder more interesting, meaningful, fun, more than anything else, whether for yourself or for others. If you have teenagers, you have toddlers, however it is, there are some ideas here for everybody. How we're going to do that? You probably know that the word Seder comes from the root order. So we have an order to follow. And the Seder has 15 steps. So I created 15 steps of ideas of how you can enhance your Seder. The big picture, the framework we're going to use for all of that is a teaching from Rav Soloveitchik, who used to say, "Ein kedusha bli hachana," there is no holiness without preparation. If you just show up to your Seder, and the first time you open your Haggadah this year is for the Seder, and don't prepare anything for it, don't expect anything to be different, right? If you don't put any work into it, it's going to be the same. And for me, this is the hardest part. I love the Seder, I enjoy it, and sometimes I'm prepping all the food and I don't have time to think about all of that. But this year, I'm going to try to start earlier so I can get some time for that. And I brought this quote from Priya Parker. I had some classes with her last year when she was publicizing her book, The Art of Gathering. And she talks about how every gathering must have a purpose, must have a goal. So while we say the words Manishtana Laila Zeh, what is different this night than all the other nights, over and over and over, and always give the same answer every year, I want you to try to ask yourself, or those in your household who might be planning this Seder with you, what is different about this particular night this year? What is unique about the people that are going to be here? Any different group of people that are going to be here this year? They are in a different age. They are after a milestone. We are changing the Haggadah we're using. We're changing the menu. We are in a new house. Whatever can be that makes things different. Or even if everything is exactly the same, what are you going to make that is going to make this night different than all the nights in all the other years? So here you go. Step 1, invitations. Have you ever been invited to a Seder? What did they look like? Did they just call you? They told you like a time and date to show up? How was that?
You were just expected to show up. It was an expectation. So there was no invitations, just.
I love that, Amy, because wouldn't it be way more fun if we're actually invited for that? How about actually making a real invitation? So this is a piece of paper that I bought on, I think was Office Depot or something like that, that looks like a scroll. And this is Moshe inviting Zipporah, his wife, for the first Passover overnight experience ever, which is when they were trying to cross the Sea of Reeds, right? So I wrote that by hand. I put like a nice lace around it, right? I could make 10 invitations like that. It'd take me 1 minute to do it, and actually send it by mail, or if you go to their house, drop it off, like send an actual invitation. Right now that the digital world is so powerful, sometimes getting a unique piece of paper that even is not in an envelope, it looks different and so on, especially to people that find that amusing, can be an interesting way to show them already, whoa, there is something different here, right? They put some effort into it, they prepare. They're gonna come differently this year because the way they got to experience that is a little bit different. But if they're coming from different places, you don't have time to put together, you're not artsy and so on, paperless post, envelope, Evite, all of that. There are ways to make it friendly and welcoming as well, using some of the online tools we have. Step number 2, welcome Milt. I see that you just joined us. We are going through 15 steps of how to make your Seder. Is me sharing that the one way to make it different is to actually send real invitations to people. So this is an example of an invitation that I wrote just as an example for us today, and maybe send real invitations to people to join you. Step number 2. What is unique about this table? Don't need to look too hard. There's nothing hidden in there. It's the big picture that I'm looking at. It's just a nice table.
As I say, they're using real plates.
Right? They're using real plates. But you can see that they put some effort into creating that table, right? So the setup of what things are going to look like and how nice they're going to look and if they're decorated or not, like, is different when you come to like a plastic table with just a piece of paper on top. And when you see that, people really prepare that to welcome you into their house. So you can do that and just make things look nicer the way you understand that to be nicer. Or you can rock the boat. And maybe you want to say, this year we're going to sit on the floor and make it a little bit different. And maybe this is the kids' table. You don't have chairs for everybody. Take the cushions out of the couch and now you have chairs. Or, this is my favorite, and I've seen multiple iterations of that. You actually create the people crossing the sea in the middle of your Passover table. If you have Lego or any kind of toys that you can use for that, use your imagination and create something interesting in the middle of the table. Again, like the invitation, those are the things that already show to the people coming to our Seder that there is something unique that we're about to do. Step number 3, choosing your Haggadah. Do you have a Haggadah that you use every single year, the same one that has stains of wine and some crust of matzah inside each page, especially in the very middle? You have those too? Yeah. It's great that you have a Haggadah that you like. If you want to keep using it, please do. You might be interested in maybe reading the Haggadah or different parts of the Haggadah in advance. Sometimes they have commentaries that you don't have time to read during the Seder, but maybe you want to look at that earlier and prepare something for that. So I selected here a couple of options. Most famous website with hundreds of options, and you can also create your own. It's called haggadot.com. Plenty of options, and you can say, oh, I like this page from this one, select this page from that one, and then at the end you have one to print that is your own. Here is a website that made a collection with like 5 to 7 Haggadot. Is a very interesting short collection of some possibilities. And here is a new thing that just came out, is an AI Haggadah. As you see that all this chat GPT and AI stuff is all over the place. Someone put something into the system to see, I want a Haggadah, and that's what came out. You can go and check it out on that post as well. I'm gonna email this presentation to everybody who came here today, so don't worry. You're gonna be able to have those links. Here are some of my favorites. I have the unofficial Hogwarts Haggadah. You know why this is unofficial? Because they didn't want to pay royalties to the owners, so there are no official brands or logos or anything like that, but it's part of the universe of Hogwarts. And as, for example, which one of the teachers is the wisest ones? Like questions like that to spark the creativity for the kids to think about some of the questions in Haggadah. The Passover Haggadah graphic novel is one of my favorites. It has the full Hebrew and English text. It's not just a comic book. It's an entire full Haggadah text. Gorf, as he's known, Jordan Gorfinkel, for about 10 years was the head director of Batman comics. So this is the level of comics we're talking about, the guy who was in charge of Batman for 10 years. And he grew up at Camp Ramah, he's a famous Jewish educator as well, and put together. And the comic strip part of it is beautiful. The text is really good. It's done by Corin. It's a really interesting one. I do have one, if anyone wants to check it out before buying here, but I think I gave it to Miriam, so it's not in my office right now. The Kveler Haggadah is available on PDF. This is something we used a couple years ago when we did online Seder here with Eitz Chaim, and it's a very interesting new Haggadah. And here is just my favorite example of the 4 children that I think it comes from that Haggadot.com website, that if you go on the 4 children, there is an option there for the Star Wars Haggadah. And I'm a big fan and I love that expression. So there are plenty of places to look at. This is already a big selection, and there's plenty for us to look at. But it can be an infinite search. I would say Haggadah is the Jewish book that has the larger amount of reprints with different texts. Everybody's gonna say Haggadah is Haggadah, right? It's always a Haggadah, but not always the same. The illustrations look different. The text can and many times is different from Haggadah to Haggadah, and there are so many different versions out there that it's unbelievable. Step 4, sharing roles. Did you ever go to a Seder that you were asked to prepare something beforehand? No? So this can be a new to all of you. 2 ideas of sharing roles. The first one, it can be something that you plan ahead. So here is an example that I took from a book from my teacher, that he goes pages with every single detail of the Haggadah, and he created step, what part of the Seder we are in, what page of the Haggadah we are in, what items are needed for that part, what is the practice. Candle lighting, someone needs to light the candles, and then a space to put who. So in this case, you can already give each person that is coming to your Seder, divide into the parts, and tell them beforehand, prepare something to say on that part because you're leading it. Or you can put a spreadsheet or something like that that people can sign up to the part that they want, right? It can be a more collective effort that people can choose. And the second option I'm sharing here is a bunch of papers with random parts of the Seder written by hand with my beautiful handwriting. The idea is to put all of that in a bowl, and people walk into your house, you welcome them and say, take one. And they have up until the time to start the Seder to come up with something, right? Or just know that that's going to be their part. Instead of having only one person leading the Seder, this is a way to really share the role and the roles and have more people participating. So maybe they want to read the explanation on the side of the Haggadah about the part they're going to do, and then they're going to share a little bit about that and so on. Being a rabbi, this is a very difficult part for me because even when I'm with my family, they usually say, you should lead it. I was like, no, like I'm off tonight. Like someone who always said, like my great uncle or my dad should lead it. And then say, okay, so now it's Kiddush. Rav Natan, please, would you say Kiddush? Like, no, that's not how it works. Like you just call the pages and tell me to do something, right? And always me. They just really share the burden with all the people. Step number 5, breaking the ice. This is one of my favorite things to do on a Seder. Here I brought 3 ideas, but infinite ideas can be used. Have people go around and introduce themselves and say who they would have symbolically invited to the Seder. Live or dead, it doesn't matter. It's to break the ice, it's to get people into like, why would Elvis Presley be my favorite guest on a Seder, and connect that with one of his songs? Like, go for it. It breaks the ice, it brings people together, can learn things about people you maybe don't know, asking that kind of questions. The second it is to have some kind of bingo cards for the Seder. And that is a game that you can play with grown-ups and children at the same time. Their cards just might look a little bit different. So for example, for adults, you can put a feminist comment, reference to liberation, wisdom from another culture or religion, or whatever comes to your mind. You want to do that with 12 boxes, you want to do that with 20 boxes, like as many options you want in your bingo. There are plenty of websites that will just put the information and it creates a bingo card for you. And for younger kids, to play the exact same game, you can put like a question, a story, weird food, a new song, whatever your imagination allows. And a way to participate with that is to give stickers to people. Stickers, something that we can use on the Jewish holidays without a problem. We usually don't write on Jewish holidays, but stickers are totally fine. So you can just stick once you get something, and it can be up to people. Bingo a line or the whole thing, we'll see or talk about that later. This is one of my favorites to do, but I never did on a Seder. I like that kind of activity, but I never did that during a Seder. Maybe this year will be the first one. Similar to the bowl with the 3 card, the pick roll, you could do that with 3 cards. 2 terms associated with the Passover Seder, the Haggadah, something that they really have to like use it in a more serious way, and a wild card, something that doesn't really belong there. And somehow during the Seder, in one of the discussions, conversations, ideas, and so on, they have to do it, but the idea is to be able to do it and have that wild card slide in there without anyone noticing. But if you notice that someone played their wild card and suddenly someone who has no babies, there are no babies there, say like baby bottle, like, you know that that's a weird thing that doesn't make any sense to be there, right? And like it catch people if they are trying to throw their things. Random games that people use in any kinds of icebreakers and getting to know people and so on. Sometimes this is the same people every single year in the Seder. Sometimes you have new people. Depending on the setup you have, a different kind of game can be more interesting. I will add to that another thing that I call a shtick. Some people have some interesting shticks and traditions that are part of the breaking the ice. So for example, I got this from our preschool last year. During the 10 plagues, as we're doing it with the kids, I can change my mask from frogs to lice, to the cattle plague, to hail, right? And on and on and on. I have for wild animals, for boils, my favorite one for locust. So each one has their mask, and then the person leading that part can wear them or can just distribute them around. I love some people that just order a bunch of rubber frogs and spread them out through the table. There's a famous frog origami that you can make that actually, if you push it, it actually jumps a little bit. If you're into origami, you can make some frogs, right? Add things that are not in the Haggadah. They're not part of a traditional Seder, but that will spark curiosity, that will make things fun as we go. Step number 6. This is the first fun fact of the night. How do you call that plate that is on the center of the table? The Seder plate, right? No, it's called keara. In the entire world is known as keara. Keara literally means a plate in Hebrew, but the keara is the Seder plate. I don't know why. I never heard that term here in the United States. So using that opportunity to teach that as well. This is probably what you're used to, right? So we have the maror, the bitter herbs, the zroa, the shank bone, the beitza, the roasted egg, parsley for karpas if you're from Western Europe. If you're from Poland and other places like that, you might have a potato in there, not karpas, because parsley does not grow in very cold weather, apparently. So some of these places, they only had potatoes. So for me, first Seder, always potato. Second Seder, always parsley, because I have family from different sides of the of Europe. And haroset and chazeret. Does anyone know what the chazeret is? You're in great company. The rabbis still have no idea what it is. The kiara, the way it is, those 6 things, the Talmud has so many discussions about them, and it's based on a manuscript of the Mishnah that is also unclear about each one of them. So I'm really surprised that at some point we settled on those 6 and not others. But the lettuce as chazeret, which, by the way, chazeret does not mean lettuce. Many times lettuce was used as maror, actually. We don't do anything with the lettuce in the Seder. Why do we need it there? Like, why is the chazeret there, right? Is a remnant from...
That's always our question too.
I will send to you, Rosella, later the page in the Talmud where they're discussing that, and you can show that to your family. And it's very interesting. I don't have the right page here, but on the Shulchan Aruch, one of the most famous book of Halacha, written in the 1600s, it was written by a Sephardic rabbi who was at this time living in Tzfat in the north of Israel. And then there is a second edition written by Rabbi Moshe Israelis in Poland, in Krakow, which is Ashkenazi. So what Ramah did, he actually wrote, if the Ashkenazim have a disagreement with that, then he wrote a little bit like, but in our countries, we do this, right? So that part of the Shulchan Aruch is very interesting because Rabbi Karo is listing in Israel all the access he has to all those things. And then Ramah starts saying like, yes, but here we don't have access to that. So he starts listing things, and some of them actually in German or Yiddish or even French, the name of the herbs that they get on the street, because that's what they had available. And many times what we now have available year-round would not be available. And those are not very precise descriptions of what it should be, but it should be something that fulfills that element. So the maror needs to be bitter. And lettuce, there are some, especially if you get the white part at the very bottom of the lettuce, it can be pretty bitter. So it could be used as that as well. Karpas can be any vegetable that you say borei pri adama, that you say that blessing over. Parsley, potato, or things that you had easily ready for that. Haroset, we know that in the Sephardic world, they add a lot of dry fruits like figs or dates or Damascus, things like that into their haroset. I find it tasty, but I don't call it haroset because for me, haroset is what my grandma used to make. And it was just apple, nuts, spices, and wine. That's it. And if you start adding a lot of dates in it, it doesn't taste like my grandmother's, and then I don't like it. So tradition is also important in creating those things. But this is not all. Have you ever heard about the orange story? Never heard about the orange story. Anyone who heard the orange story?
Oh yeah, I mean this is an old. Okay, maybe I'm really old.
What's the orange story, Linda?
That the women speaking in the shul, women taking active roles in worship is as out of place as the orange on the Seder plate. So now we have the orange.
I love it. I love it, Linda, because you did exactly what I thought was going to happen, and you told us the wrong story.
Wrong story? Okay.
Exactly. And that's what I wanted. So thank you. Because what happened is that the wrong story became more popular than the real story. The wrong story that people tell is that a man, a rabbi, was asked if women belong into active roles in the synagogue, that women can be on the bima. And that rabbi said that women belong in the bima as much as an orange belongs to the Seder plate. And then people started to put an orange in the Seder plate, say, look, Rabbi, now women can be on the bima too because we have an orange in the Seder plate. This is the wrong story. It's a beautiful, very fun story, but it's the wrong story, which is perfect exactly to talk about what we have to talk about, which is a story that is all by women turned into a story where the man is the protagonist of the story. So the original Oren story is like that. Dr. Susanna Heschel, daughter of Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel, was talking to a group of lesbian women in the Bay Area, I think in the 70s, 80s, or something like that. She works in college world. And they were excluded from society for being lesbians at that time, and they didn't feel like they were part of the Jewish spectrum. And someone said to them that they are like a crust of bread in the Seder plate, meaning something completely forbidden. So then they went and put the crust of bread in the Seder plate and said, like, look, now we are part of it because we did it. And then Dr. Susanna Heschel said, look, there's something wrong about actually putting the crust of bread in the Seder plate. Like, it's really chametz. Like, we shouldn't be doing that. So how about an orange, which is not is disruptive enough to ask the question, but it's not disruptive in the sense that it's not chametz to symbolize that. So she started that tradition of adding an orange for inclusion of lesbian and gay Jews into the community. And later on, that amplified and became more of a thing about all minorities, and there's an element of feminism in there as well, and so on. So the link that I have on the bottom of the screen has the article where she tells the real story. And as I mentioned earlier, I'm going to share that presentation with those who came here today, so you're going to have access to the link as well. Other than the orange, you can add more things. So a couple of ideas. First, if you're vegetarian or vegan, you might find problems with, for example, having a shank bone there. So what can you do? Here is a quote from the Talmud where they're asking what are those two cooked dishes that could be there that the Mishnah is talking about, and Rav Huna said beets and rice. He doesn't say those, and there is a longer discussion there, so I'm bringing the end of the conversation. It doesn't mean that only beets and rice, but he meant that as like examples of dishes that are cooked that could serve there. So the idea is that the shank bone reminds of the sacrifice in the temple, but he explains that any cooked dish would do the job as well. So I keep kosher, I separate dairy and meat, and I barely eat meat, and many times I want to have a Seder that is completely dairy, and I don't want to have a shank bone in my table when I'm eating dairy. So I would take some rice that I cooked for the dinner, and I'm going to make it. You might be asking, what? Rice in Pesach? I don't do that. We'll talk about that later. But Sephardic people do that, and there are plenty of permissions for Ashkenazim to eat rice as well. If you can't eat rice for real and you really want to follow that tradition, beets could work as well. And this is something that I learned new this year, that vegans would put a flower or a seed that replace the egg. Why? Because the egg has the symbol of new life coming up, so that's the seed, right? And also the idea that is a circle, so that's why a circular flower that sometimes you're up, sometimes you're down, and also is connected to the sacrifices in the temple as well. Those are the two cooked dishes, are the shank bone and the hard-boiled egg. New traditions that came up. Orange, here you see the right explanation in support of LGBTQ inclusion. Olive is something new in support of peace between Israelis and Palestinians, as there are many olive fields in the West Bank, and a lot of the fight happens around those fields. Artichoke in support of interfaith families. This is the only place I've seen that. Never heard about that before, but sounds very interesting. I'm curious why. And tomato in support of farm workers' rights. I think it has to do with a story with Walmart long time ago, that there are tomato farms that people are not being paid on time and so on. So there was a huge strike and so on. So it's something that goes back probably 10 to 15 years. and there was a massive rally around that. Any questions about Seder plate? Anyone have ever seen any new other thing that can be in the Seder plate? There is one more I'll put out. Go ahead, Milt.
Yeah, I just was going to comment that I'm going to be leading a Seder for 7 women. So the orange, I think, will be an interesting innovation. That it is very helpful.
I will send you the presentation later. There's the link there to the full story, so you can share that with them. There is one more thing that I shared in my email that went out earlier last week to everybody. If you want to buy chocolate for Pesach, a brand that I suggest, the majority of cacao production in the world comes from Ivory Coast in Africa. And the amount of challenges they're having with bad work conditions and conditions analogous to slavery are very challenging in that industry. So there is something called fair trade chocolate. There are fair trade many things, but fair trade chocolate is becoming more of a thing because it's known that it's something that the chocolate industry in particular struggles with. They even have something that looks like a kosher symbol that says fair trade, that is something like an agency that was certified as organic or certified as humane or certified as kosher. There's one that certifies that things are fair trade. I know that Trader Joe's has one. I put a brand on the link that is a very interesting one as well, that are for sure getting from the right places. So since we're talking about freedom, we're talking about slavery, things like the tomato, things like the chocolate that are dealing with real kinds of slavery in modern days are things that people bring up because we might be free, but the struggle of one is the struggle of all. And if we're not all free, we still have responsibility to do something for everybody else. 7, karpas. So I asked you what is karpas, and we talked about parsley, we talked about potato. Karpas can also be appetizers. Once we say the blessing Borei Pri Adama, we can eat anything at that point. And you know that Jews usually complain, and hungry Jews complain even more. This will buy you time to do the fun games we talked about. They won't be hungry. Give them carrots, celery, and hummus. It's a great snack, healthy, and people can enjoy longer conversations because they're not like, when we're gonna eat, when we're gonna eat, when we're gonna eat, as my brother would say. So people maybe can last a little bit longer in some of the meaningful parts. Last year, I think, was the first time I added that into my Seder, and people loved it. It was very interesting. I love hummus, so I just cut peppers and carrots and celery and a bunch of other things, put some dips into it, and people could keep eating, and no one complained that they were hungry. Step 8, yachatz, and we're only in the step 4 of the Seder, but already step 8 in our ideas. Yachatz is the break of the matzah, that half of it is going to be hidden later for the afikomen. So one of the many possible symbolism is to splitting the Red Sea. So depending if you have kids and so on, it can be an interesting way that as you're going to break it, make a huge moment. Like now it's as if you're parting the sea and everybody look at that, the sea's going to split, and then you split. Like make a whole theatrical drama thing about that, right? The kids like seeing someone trying to break a matzah in the middle. For some reason, it can be something very, very fun. A major challenge we had as kids that we play at that time is that the larger piece is the one you save for afikomen. And me and my brother would always say, what if they're exactly the same? How are you going to choose which one is going to be the afikomen? And then our parents say, well, you can never break exactly in half. So every year, my brother and I broke 300 matzot, trying to get one that will actually break in half. And I have the solution if you actually want to do that. The trick is to get a brush, like a cooking brush, with a little bit of water, make a water line in the exact middle of the matzah and let the water go a little bit in, and then the wet part is going to break exactly in the middle. So it can be done, but not by just cracking it. So you need extra gadgets to make that work. And each house has a different way to play the Afikoman game. In my mother's side of the family, there were usually a lot of kids, and someone would hide and have to search for the Afikoman, and then you'll negotiate for prices. My family was totally fine using money on a Chag as I was growing up. So not just we had to negotiate, we would negotiate how much money we're going to get. So last year they gave us 10, this year we want 15, right? Inflation. And we would try to bargain with our uncles and grandparents about all of that. In my dad's side of the family, the tradition was a little bit different. So when my grandpa was still alive, and later my dad started to be that person, is the person's going to wash the hands. So my grandpa would actually leave the table and go wash his hands. That time we would steal the afikoman from the table, so we didn't have to hide. We just kept it as like kidnapped the afikoman. And then we negotiate how much to give it back. So we never had to search for it, but the bargain game was even higher because we really kidnapped it and we had it as a hostage. And one day we tried to really play like it was a real hostage, the piece of matzah. So explain to people how this is going to work, what you're going to do differently this year about the afikoman, so everybody know what to expect. And you can create some games for finding the afikoman, right? I don't think anyone is going to find right away the afikoman in that one. Is actually a pretty hard one that I created over there. And to make it more fun, I didn't put just the word afikoman in there. I put a couple more words that are related to Pesach as well. So people might be able to find other things too that are like, oh, I found something, but still not the right one. But if you want to make that more Pesach-like, you can put that into a matzah, right? And you want to print that in a sheet of matzah. You can do that. It comes already with the lines, right? If that helps. And of course, I have here the answer key. So if you want to use that one or others. So afikoman, I on purpose put on a diagonal because I think it's the hardest one for people to find. And the other elements of the Seder plate, matzah, matzah ball. What is this one? Chazeret is upside down. Beitza also upside down. Haroset, karpas, matzah. Oh, there's another afikoman here as well. Zroa and Eliyahu. So there are those websites also. You can put the words you want. It creates for you. So very, very easy to make a game like that. Here we go. Telling this story. This is step number 5 of your Seder called Magid. This is the main part of the Seder. Usually from beginning to this part of the Seder should take you up to 10 minutes. It's Kiddush, wash hands without blessing, Kaddish, Urchatz, Karpas with the Karpas, and Yachatz, we break the matzah. That's it. We only do those 4 things. This is 10 minutes. Now, Manishtana, Havadimainu, Alachmania, Dayenu, all the songs is part of the Magid. This is really the bulk of what we're doing. This is an interesting take that I took from a friend of mine, Rabbi Adir Yokut in Westchester County, New York. And pick and choose. I'll tell you a secret. Probably you never really read the entire Haggadah. In the traditional text of the Haggadah, there are 4 tellings of the story. Actually, the entire story is told 4 times in 4 different ways in the traditional text. It's a lot. We don't need 4 times of the same story over and over and over. Pick what works for you. Look through the Haggadah. I tried one year to use my rabbinic mind tricks with my family. And the Talmud says that if someone asks a question, you do not need to ask the manishtana questions. The manishtana questions are there as suggestions from the Mishnah. If you don't know any question to ask, but since you have to ask a question, here are some options. That's where the manishtana comes from. So we got to the manishtana part, and I tell my family, well, you always complain that the Seder is too long. Some people already ask questions. We can skip manishtana. They went nuts. No, that part you can skip. We like that one. So wait, make your mind. Like, either you want me to skip things that I can skip, or no, but that's the part we like. So figure out what are the parts that are meaningful to your family, whether just for tradition because of the music, because you have a unique tradition about that, because we just like it, or because any other reason, and pick the parts you want, but know them beforehand. Don't come to your Seder skimming through the Haggadah. Do we do that? No, like put some sticky notes like this ones, right, in your books, and know where to flip when it gets to the place. Questions. This is the main part of the Seder. I think there are two ways to do that. One is for you to already come up with questions for people to engage in interesting discussions. It can be the role that you're going to give to someone. Remember, they were planning the Seder before giving to people. So you can actually tell someone who usually hates singing the songs, reading the Haggadah, okay, you pick one question for us to debate about tonight. And at that moment, when we ask questions, you ask that person to tell the question, and we're actually going to have 5, 10, 15 minutes, even more, because people are eating, right? They're not hungry. They're not impatient. They can stand for a more meaningful conversation. And you really bring an interesting question that is related to the values of Pesach, that discusses freedom, that discusses slavery, that discusses many issues of our time in a way that is meaningful and participatory to your audience in your Seder. And for the leader of the Seder to start asking questions and invite people to ask questions, right, it's welcoming. People feel that they can ask questions about all the weird things that we do in the Seder as well. 11, the question I get the most. Teens, what do we do with them? The rest of the year, I'm not so sure. But during Pesach, we have a lot of activities for them to do. So if you have teens, ask what they like. Or if they are your teens, you probably already know. Are they into gaming? Ask them to create a game or a puzzle like the Fikoman I created. Ask them to create that. Say, hey, create a game for the Fikoman. Let them create the scavenger hunt that you and other adults are going to have to go search for the keys. They like cooking. Great. Gives them a task that they can accomplish. Haroset. If you have a recipe, it's not that hard. My grandma thinks she gave me her recipe. Usually a recipe has numbers and words, right? You need the amounts of things. Hers has only words. You add a little bit of that, and then it tastes like, I like it. And I was like, Grandma, I need numbers, right? She doesn't use numbers. It's not her thing. That's not how she cooks. So last year, my dad and I called her and we said, Grandma, we're using 2 pounds of cinnamon. Is that correct? And it's like, no, that's way too much. Like, so put a number. If 2 pounds is too much, give me an average. Give me something, right? If you know that this is too much, you know something. She still didn't give us the numbers, but I don't know how I can recreate her recipe. I use the ingredients, for sure, different brands, different styles, and so on. But having that taste engraved in my soul, I can start adding a little bit of that and a little bit of that and start mixing and so on. And after being alone, away from her for many years on Pesach, I kind of can recreate that same haroset. Theater, they're into theater. Find that graphic novel that I mentioned, or any other book. PJ Library might have some with the story of Pesach, and ask them to act it out. They are into debate because they are in debate club in high school. great. Set up a like Passover versus modern slavery or any other question or debate you want to set up, right? And ask them to prepare their argument, like give them in advance that they can work for that, or have them as the moderators and ask them to come up with the questions and others to debate. Reading, ask them to read something and pick out about a Haggadah, and if they'd like to share a little bit about what they did. They're learning a new language. Ask them to do some part of the Seder in the new language that they're learning. They're into photography. They're into music, right? So many ideas is to build on their passion, something that they actually like and would have a good excuse to dedicate some time to, and make that meaningful to them. If you are concerned with teens, how about toddlers? What to do if you have some toddlers around? You can do many things. One of them is to start early, right? Don't expect them to be awake for way too long, and they cannot survive through page 10 of the Haggadah, right? You have to go in a very different pace, but explain it away. Keep sharing with them throughout the process, like what we're gonna do, and weeks in advance, and then the days before, that day's coming, we're gonna do this, right? Preparing them for that, maybe showing pictures of old Sedarim and things like that, so they are aware of it. Make it fun, and fun for you too. If it's fun for you, it's gonna be fun for them too. Use art, whatever you want, make it about them. Put the story into Haggadah. Act it out, buy some costumes, buy some props, really tell the story in a way that is gonna make fun and be interesting for them, and they're gonna love it and be memorable, and they'll be 30 years old, they're gonna be with their friend, oh, I still remember when my parents used to act it out, and so on and on and on. Can be a good idea to engage them. And sing, even if they can't sing along, those melodies start to become known to them. Prepare them beforehand. Spotify has plenty of playlists of those things. Play in the car, play it at home, and they're gonna get used to it, even if it's in Hebrew. I decided to not add any English song into this presentation because I don't know them. I know that there are hundreds of Passover songs in English. Even some that people here would do in English, for example, Who Knows One, or the Haggadah. Those are two at the very end of the Seder, sometimes people do in English. I grew up with them in Haggadah is actually in Aramaic, and Echad Miodia, Who Knows One in Hebrew. I never did that in any other language. And here there are a lot of parodies that people put out together with the melody of a famous pop song and so on. I have lists that I inherited and learned from people. If anyone really wants English songs in for Pesach, let me know and I can see what I can find here, but I decided to not add anyone here. Most important things working with toddlers, be flexible. If you have to skip the order, you have to make things all around. If you need to start with dinner, do it, right? The idea is to really have ways to include them and make them participate in any way, shape, or form with them. My favorite, step 13, the 4 cups. My dad is really into wine. So whenever we have to select what wine we're going to bring to the Seder, we need to know what the food we're going to cook and how we can match one with the other. This is the perfect option for a wine tasting time. So it doesn't say anywhere that all 4 cups must have the same wine. So how can you play with the tasting? The first one has to be either good by itself, because we're going to say that on Kiddush, or with the appetizers that you're going to put out. So if you're putting a lot of acid stuff like peppers, like tomatoes, it can be complicated with pairing that with the right wine, right? Acidity is not the best friend of wine. A Chianti Italian could be something interesting for going that direction. But has to be something that it tastes good if you are doing it by itself. If you take a very old and heavy Cabernet that you are saving for the meal, for the meat, right? And you have that for the first cup, people might feel like, oh, it doesn't taste good. It's not that it doesn't taste good, it's that it needs to pair with the fat of the meat that it actually can combine. The second is the one that we're actually looking to pair with the meal, because the second is the one we do during the Magid part when we're telling the story. So this is probably the one that people are going to still have in their glasses once you get to the meal. So that's probably one you need to buy more bottles than the others if you're playing with that. The third one we're going to drink during Birkat Hamazon when we're benching right after eating. So it can be a dessert wine, right? You're going to eat with afikoman, and you can serve some chocolate, some fruit with that and have a dessert wine. My favorite, ice wine. Canada has some, or Tokai from Hungary. Those are really good dessert wines that I really like. And number 4, this last 4th wine, technically there's no food at that point of the Seder anymore. So this is the one you want to keep drinking even after the Seder. When the kids went to sleep, that's the one you want to keep drinking. That's the one you choose for the 4th cup. Or any other combination of all of that. Sometimes you might want to have 3 different dessert wines and try to see which one is best. And different people are going to pass the ball around, right? And see, depending how many people you have, and play with the wine. It doesn't have to just be Borei Bragav, and the same thing with Manischewitz, right? We can drink good wine on Pesach, especially because we're drinking so much, it better be good, right? So that's the idea of the wine tasting. Yes, Rosella.
That's what I was going to say. You're implying that the Manischewitz comes in more than 2 flavors, right?
I'm implying that you shouldn't be using Manischewitz if you don't like it. Yes,
Yeah,
Linda.
make sure you have a way to get home afterwards, other than the donkey.
Oh, totally. I usually am thinking that if you're doing that in your own home, right?
Well, not everybody. I mean, if you're hosting people for the Seder, they're not all going to sleep on the floor like it's an undergraduate party.
I mean, it's an old rabbinic tradition to stay awake overnight studying Torah, so they might not be coming back way too soon. Who knows? But yes, if anyone is driving, make sure that there is a designated driver or someone is taking them home. Step number 14, fun facts. So I brought you one fun fact, but you probably learned a bunch of fun facts today, and you can Google fun facts about the Haggadah and Pesach and maybe other things, but think about ways to add fun facts into what you're doing there. Give me a word, any word, and I'll show you how the root of the word is Greek. Okay, afikomen. Afikomen comes from the Greek word epikomen, which means that which comes after or dessert. So afikoman appears in the Mishnah. It sounds like a Hebrew word. It's afikoman. In this country, most people are going to say afikomen, and they think it's an Yiddish word because it's just a pronunciation like an Yiddish word, but it actually comes from the Greek. Why would you think that we have a word that comes from Greek already being used in the 2nd century as they're putting together the Seder? No specialists in Greek culture?
Well, why do we call it a synagogue? I mean, there were a lot of around that time. There was some cultural assimilation. There were converts coming in, and Greek. I mean, that's why we have the Greek New Testament and Christianity.
So let's think about that. The Seder was put together as a Seder even in its earliest versions around the year 200. And what the Seder looked like in the year 200 was very different than what it looks like today. But that's the earliest manuscript we have from something like that. Imagine the years preceding to that built to the existence of that text. If we're talking about freedom, who is a reference of free people? The Greeks and the Romans. They are the major empires that led that area for the past 500 years. So a lot of the symbols we have in our Seder that have the goal of showing elements of freedom many times have to deal with how they perceive the free people, were the oppressors of their time. More than that, there is something called a symposium. If anyone who is interested about that, go research what were the symposiums of about 2,000 years ago in Greece. They would go to multiple houses on the same night. So people would pop in from place to place, learn, right? That's what they were doing, discussing, arguing, because that's the aristocrat culture of Greek at that time. And they would ask questions, because that's how one learns in the logic argument with the Greeks. So asking questions, something that also comes from the symposium. And afikomen is something also that is something that you save for later, that you eat later, also in the symposiums. We recline to eat during the Seder. Why? You probably remember those pictures of Greeks and Romans eating recline, some grapes like that, right? This is what free people do. They were the free people. So there's a lot of little bits here and there of Greek culture spread out through the Seder, because they were a reference of freedom to the people who created the original Seders. Finally, we made it to the 15th step. And the 15th step, just like I've been preaching that we need to do in our Seder, is your turn. I want to hear from all of you if there is anything that you ever heard about or did or do in your own family that you like to share with us, that we can learn from and make our Sederim interesting.
So I'll share that we created our own Haggadah years and years and years and years ago, with the idea that, like, when the kids were young, and then we would then move on to another Haggadah, but they of course still want to use the original Haggadah. But we use that, and it has like jokes in it and pictures of all the kids when they were little, and then the Haggadah part. So
I love it.
but I will say, oh, go ahead.
No, please do.
But I will say that we were chuckling at your description of the Seder at my sister-in-law's house, where we spend the whole time arguing whether we should read that passage or not. And we spend more time arguing about which parts of the story we should read than we actually spend reading the Haggadah. So, yeah.
I love that you actually made it, because my family tried for ages to create our own. And my cousins were into graphic design and were ready to like put together and so on, but they wanted me to help with the content and all of that, and it's 100% on me. I never really helped them with that. So we had multiple Xeroxes of multiple Haggadot and so on, and it was never really well organized, because I didn't do my part in helping my cousins and put together. So big praise for you actually doing it, because I heard about a lot of families who want to do their own Haggadah and never actually did.
And I will say, in pre-website land, so you had to actually do it yourself, and we like had to copy the Hebrew and cut it out and paste it on the page and then Xerox it. Yeah.
I love that. I love it. Amy, I think you had something to share. We cannot hear you. I see that you unmuted, but no sound is coming from you. Try a different mic on the options. We would love to hear you. I'm so sad it's not working. Linda, Milt, any things to share?
Well, years ago, when I would lead a Seder, I was always kind of awestruck by the literal terminology and the Chumash of, like the repeated mention of an outstretched arm, and I forget exactly what the translation is, but hearing, I always had a problem with the Haggadah being somebody's version of the story. And so I really liked extracting and reading from the Chumash the real story. And I plan to do that in the Seder that I will lead for these 7 ladies.
I love that you shared. It's very interesting that there are parts of the Haggadah that were written by other people, but there is one unique part of the Haggadah that is a part that a lot of people usually skip. I would imagine. You can tell me if that's something you usually do or you skip. My father was a wandering Aramean. Have ever come across that section? So that section is actually a quote from the Torah. Arami Oved Avi in Hebrew. There's a lot of discussions of who is that person that was a wandering Aramean and what's the meaning of that. But this is a quote from the Torah that in 3 to 4 verses is a very good summary of the story. So in the Torah words, I think it's probably from Dvarim. So my father was a wandering Aramean, and there was famine. They went to Egypt, they went into slavery, and they were freed, and here we are, right? So in 3 to 4 verses, this is how the Torah tells the story. So as I mentioned, the Magid part has actually 4 different tellings of the story in 4 different ways. For example, the 4 children. What is the 4 children doing there? The 4 children does not tell the story. It adds nothing actually to the story. Has nothing to do with the Seder. The 4 children are based on a Midrash, a rabbinic telling, to explain that there is a commandment that parents must teach their kids in the way that they will learn. The 4 kids are Midrash about education, that we have to speak in a way that our children with all their different abilities can understand. And then we're talking about how each one of the children reacted to the way that they were told the story. But the 4 children in itself is no telling of the story. It's not even a mandate part of the traditional Haggadah that you must say, otherwise it doesn't work, right? The magic doesn't work. The 4 children is just a midrash there to help us think about how we approach all of that, but not a story per se. So it's very interesting how multiple tellings make it into the Haggadah, and in part of it is marketing, right? In a time when printing books was an expensive effort, the ones that were able to make it to a book became famous, and you need marketing for that. So it's very interesting how some parts really made it into the Haggadah and others didn't, in a time that it's not like today, as you're saying, Rosella, that you have to make copies and Xerox and cuts and so on. People are not even that. People had to rewrite by hand for hundreds of years to keep a text alive, right? So it's very interesting to imagine the ones that actually made it to our day. Any last questions or comments or ideas about the Seder? So I want to thank everybody for joining us tonight and learning a little bit together. This was very helpful to me to prepare my own Seder. I revisited some ideas that I had in my folder, and energized me also to think about some new ideas for this year. And I hope that it energized you to think about different things for this year as well.